Okay, then let's go ahead and get started. Once again, I want to say thank you for attending today's EnRoute webinar. Today, our presenter will be the wonderful Aaron Clapp, who knows everything there is to know about EnRoute. Today, he'll be talking about how to effectively use ATP Lite in EnRoute Plus, and he'll have his presentation for 20 minutes or so, and then we will have a question and answer session. So you can ask any questions about ATP Lite or about EnRoute in general, and Aaron will try and answer as many of those as we have time for. So if you think of anything, just type it into the chat window during the presentation, and we will be recording today's EnRoute webinar, and we'll post that to the SAI YouTube channel, and we'll send everyone a link to the recording as well, so you can review it anytime you like. And with that, we'll turn it over to Aaron.
All right, sounds good. So let's take a look at ATP Lite. So first of all, you're going to get ATP Lite included with EnRoute Plus. This is a way for you to nest and toolpath objects that are going to be in large groups or that you do very frequently. So we're going to kind of start setting up ATP, how we want to set up strategies and how we use ATP and what it's all about and kind of that. So first of all, ATP is short for automatic toolpath. And what ATP does is if you have the full version of ATP, the program is designed to actually take DXF files from a cabinet software like Cabinet Vision, KCD, Cabinet Solutions, or some other program like that, and then automatically apply toolpathing, nest, and do everything based on layers from list files. Now, the light version of ATP does a very similar thing, except for the difference here is going to be that we're not pulling in files from a cabinet software. We're actually just pulling in files from our design. So we're going to import the DXF files manually, and we're going to have the items on screen that we want to apply toolpathing to, and we can do it all at once. So let's get into some setup type of stuff, and then kind of talk about how this all works. So let's just show you the interface real quick. So you're going to click up here at the top, which is your automatic toolpath, which I believe is also under the file menu. You'll see these three buttons here: define layers, ordering and nesting, and then your setup. So if we take a look at the ordering or the setup tab, there's going to be some options in here in case you want to print some things out. If we want to create a printout, we can turn these on. We're going to want to output the file, so I usually have this checked. You'll see some stuff in here for labels and whatnot, which is not something that you can really do here because we don't actually, ATP Plus won't have the labels add-on. You can create label add-on, but at that point you need the full version of ATP. So that's why it's grayed out here for us. We can change the output folder path where we want that to go, and if we want it to create a subdirectory for it, we can also do that. Because one of the things that we can have the software do, or ATP do, is also nest, toolpath nest, and then create an output file for us, so we don't actually have to do any of that work. Then we have our ordering and nesting tab. This is going to be really familiar to you if you already do a lot of outputting. You're going to want to set up how you want your priorities to happen. So whether your strategies happen first or objects or however that works, you're going to want to set this up very similar to the way you output typically. And then we have a few output nesting options right here. So we've got our standard different types of nesting methods. We have our step angle, how much we want to allow rotate, our margin, which is the gap between the part and the edge of the plate, and then our gap, which is the spacing in between our parts. And then we have our little diagram here that we use to tell it where we want it to nest. So we can define what corner we want that to be. And then we got some options here for multi-layer in case we want to, if we have a bunch of parts that you're nesting, you can do it in a multiple layer. And then we can have it use holes. Now the use holes is kind of an interesting one. Let's say that you're nesting a bunch of acrylic letters or something like that that you're cutting out. And let's say these letters are fairly large. If there's a hole large enough for another part to fit inside of there, it'll go ahead and use that. If you're doing cabinet parts and stuff like that, this kind of will never get used. But anyway, so use holes. That's an option. The main part, what we're going to deal with here, is going to be under the define layers. This is where we're going to set up our layers, our strategies, and what we want the software to do to this particular file. So I'm going to close ATP for now, and we're going to talk about the layers and the strategies and kind of get all those sorted out for when you try and set this up. So first of all, ATP requires you to set up everything in layers. So actually, let me go back in here. We can kind of see this. I already kind of have it set up here, and we'll kind of talk about this. But what it's basically doing here is it's identifying the layer inside of the file, and then we're assigning a strategy to that layer. So if we take a look at this file, for example, I have all layers turned on right now. If I turn off all layers, you'll notice that layer 1 is blank, and that's okay. And then we have multiple different layers here. So we've got our cut to pass, which is our outside cut. We have the main, which is this big long dado. And then we have a route back, which are these smaller, probably hinges or some other type hole here. We're going to assign that as smaller dados. And then we've got shelf holes. And then we have 5mm through holes. Now, when I imported this DXF actually already had all of these layers predefined. They were already set up for me. This was a DXF file that I had pulled from a KCD output. And so a lot of these were already set up this way. Now, if you don't have that, what you would end up doing is you would come in here to your Layers tab, and you would need to set up some layers. So you would want to make sure these layers were set up in such a way that would make sense. So let's just say you're creating a brand new part, or maybe you're doing your own custom cabinet parts, or it doesn't have to be cabinet parts. It could be any kind of part. As long as it has multiple tool paths and multiple parts to it, or multiple pieces, we can use ATP for it. And what makes it really nice is if we're using the same strategies or the same cutting type methods, we can make this pretty reproducible. So in this case, you would just create several layers. Maybe you have an outside cut. Maybe you have an inside cut layer. Maybe you have some little pilot holes or something that you're cutting out, or maybe you're doing some different things, right? We're going to define each different style of cut to their own layer. Now, one of the things we can take a look at here is, for example, why didn't you may ask, why did I put my 5mm inch holes, shelf holes, and through holes on different layers? Well, the reason why I did that is because I'm going to assign a different strategy to each of these sets of holes. One's going all the way through, and one of them is not. And if we look at ATP, I actually have two different strategies. I have one for shelf holes and one for through holes. So in order for the software to separate and be able to know which ones are which, I have to have them in a separate layer. And these layers can be infinite in amount. You can have, tens and tens of layers in here with different purposes. So the main thing that we want to do here is to kind of keep them consistent. So if you're always going to use 5mm through hole, I would make sure that that layer always, you use the same name, so you don't have to keep setting this up all the time. Because we'll show you here in a minute here, I can actually save this, and then I can just pull it back up if I'm doing this kind of job multiple times. So that's the first thing, is we need to set up the file with layers. Now, again, you might actually get DXF files that already have the layers set up with them, and that's okay. That's perfect. So as long as you have those set up in some sort of way, or if you're doing it from scratch, you'll just need to set them up on your own. Once we do that, then we can go about figuring out, okay, how do we apply these toolpaths? Well, ATP has to have a strategy. A strategy is just basically, if you're familiar with EnRoute at all, strategy is just a saved template with a set of parameters already saved. So for example, let me just click on one of these outside cuts, and I'm going to ungroup this one here for a second. So ungroup. I'm going to grab this outside piece, and actually I'm going to do this just to make life a little easier on me. I'm going to regroup that and make a copy out here just so I can mess with this one, leave those alone. Okay, I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to click on my routing offset toolpath. So in order to get a strategy, I have to have some artwork on screen that I can create. So maybe for your first job, you may need to set everything up manually. So now what I do is I can pull up my strategy, and they're saved up here at the top. How do we do this? Well, what I do is I can simply start adding my tools and placing my settings. So let's say we're using this, and we want to set it at, this is going to be an outside cut, so maybe this is at 0.75. And then I click on my edit settings, and I might want to add my feed rate. So maybe 120, 80, 18,000, right? So maybe I've got all my entry exit settings in here. I've got all my settings that I like. I click OK. Once I have all the settings, so pretty much let's just say I'm ready to hit OK to accept these changes or to accept this toolpath as the toolpath I want to use. Right before that, I'm going to hit Save As, and now I can type in my new template. And you can give this a name. What I would suggest is that you give it a constructive name, sort of like this, something that makes sense, and what you'll be able to say, oh, okay, I know what that is. I can click on that, and you'll know exactly where we're going with it. You just hit Save, and now that saves that as a new template. So if I were to X out of this and select something else, let's say I make another copy of this, click on another drawing, hit routing offset. Now my new template is long right in there with my routing offset template. And if we click on this one, we can see it's pulled in some settings that I had set up previously. So you're going to want to do this with every type of toolpath. Now, if you've been using EnRoute for a while, you probably already have some of these strategies set up. So this is probably already ready to go for the most part. The only thing you may want to do is add some additional ones if you need to. So we're going to want to do this for every type of toolpath. So for example, with my dados, if I go to my island fill, you can see that I've got several different dado cuts here. I've got one for dados at 0.5 inches and one at 0.25 inches. So I've got several of them set up there. If I click on my my little holes here, I'm going to go to my toolpath, and I'm going to click on place the center of it at the center of an object, and you can see here that I've created a couple here. So I'll need to do this for each set of toolpaths. And once I build up my library of things that I frequently do, then once I go into ATP and click on my layers, I can now see that all of my strategies will appear in this drop-down list. And so this is how I'm going to set this up. So I've got my layers, I've got my strategies, and those are going to be the two main things that we really need in order to kind of get this working. So we got layers and we got strategies. And let me just open up a I'm going to open up a blank document here just to kind of see what something might look like. So let's import a DXF file, and we'll just pull in one of these. Doesn't really matter. So here's a DXF file. This DXF file had its own layers already. So you can see these are slightly different. We've got a lock groove and some different layers in here. So you can see that if you're getting files from a customer that does layering, you'll actually have them save those layer names, and then you can just use those as you import them in. So that's the good thing here, is you can just use those layer names as you pull them in. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and just nest this group of parts together. And the thing is here is that this would be fairly annoying if I had to, if let's say that this wasn't in layers and this was just raw toolpath or just raw drawing. This would be really annoying to have to deal with. I would have to try and come in here and select every set of holes for each group and toolpath them separately. Now that I have them in layers or in sections like this, it actually makes it kind of nice because technically, yes, I could go in here and toolpath them as kind of individual units. So for example, I could come in here and select this whole section just like this and create my toolpath. So I could do this manually, and put in, these are my through holes. I could put this in here, click OK. I could go to the next layer and so on and so forth. I could do that. And this actually makes it a lot easier, but we're striving for extreme efficiency here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave all of them blank. When I go to ATP, I can then define my layers. So these are the layers. And how do you get these layers? By default, you're actually going to get something like this. So I'm going to clear out the layers. This is what yours is going to look like when you first open it. So what do we do? Well, I'm going to say use active, because active means the active drawing that I have on my screen right now. So I say use active, and it's automatically going to import all of my layers for me. And so then at this point, I can say, all right, well, now I need to assign my strategies. Well, we know that layer one didn't really have anything in it, so we don't need to do anything with that. My cut to pass, I had a special routing offset set for that one. My main, that was going to be the dados with the deeper depth. We just set that up there. My route back, I had set for my 0.25 inch dados. And again, if these depths don't make any sense, it's okay. This is just an example that I set up here. And then we're going to do 5mm shelf holes at 0.5 inches deep. And then this one's going to be at 0.76 or all the way through. So just like that, now I have my file set up so that this can be toolpath. Now, one of the things I can do is you'll see a lot of different settings over here. Some of these are going to apply and some are not. The design depth here is not going to really apply that much in this case. So typically we'll always leave this at 0. And then use depth, this means we're going to use the depth of the strategy. So we want that checked. These settings here are going to be interesting. So we can do TP, means toolpath. So I can choose not to toolpath certain layers. So for example, for whatever reason, I could turn off my outside cut layer, and it would nest it. It would put all the toolpaths on everything else except for the outside layer. So I can have it toolpath it or not. This NT is nest together, which typically you're always going to want to do. You're always going to want to have nest together. Basically, what this means is that nests all the parts together in the same, not same group, but in the same job. Because if you hit nest separate, what that means is that's actually going to pull that part away from the rest of the nest, and it's going to toolpath it separately in a different file somewhere. So typically we want nest together. If there was a reason why you had a particular file that you did want to nest separately from everything else, you could choose the nest separate and it would separate it out and create an own blank document for it and then nest it over there. And then OP means output. So you could, in theory, just turn this off. And if I just click on the top, I could deselect all of them, or I can uncheck certain layers. So perhaps maybe there might be a layer that you don't want to output, or maybe you just don't want to output at all, and you just want it to have it do the nesting and toolpathing. So that might be an option. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be uh, tied to output. So there's some things there. So you could just have it only toolpath and nest. In this case, I'm going to have it create the output. And once I'm done with this, I'm kind of ready to go. All I have to do is say process active. When I click process active, it's going to create a brand new file for me. And you can see here that it said, hey, this file was created. So it's created an output for me using the driver that I had selected in my EnRoute. And it's going to pull up a new document for me with all my parts nested in there and toolpath. So this can be really, really powerful in getting those tools and those toolpaths done really quickly. Even if you don't use the nesting feature, or even if you don't use uh, um, the output option, it's really nice to be able to take a series of layers and have everything just toolpath all in one big swipe. So this kind of makes things a little bit easier on you, especially if you're doing a lot of stuff that uses the same strategies. If you're cutting a lot of the same stuff, you're doing a lot of repetitive things. It really makes this easy in terms of I can set it up however I want it, and then it'll apply all the toolpathing for me. So now the only disadvantage here is because we're using the Lite version, we have to import all the DXF files that we want to cut into the artwork first. So that is one thing that you have to be aware of. So if I had multiple DXF files that I wanted to pull in, I would just pull them in separately and then have them on screen, set up my layers, make sure that I've got all my layers set up properly, click on ATP, make sure that I've got a strategy for each layer, and then I just process them that way, and it'll nest them. So that's kind of the basics of the ATP toolpath setup. It's a pretty powerful little program. Mainly, what we want to emphasize here is that you may be importing files or you may be creating files frequently, and this is a really easy way to kind of get those toolpaths. Because once they're kind of nested or even once they're in place, toolpathing can be very, very tedious. And so trying to apply a bunch of different toolpaths individually can be tedious, especially if you're doing this all day long. If you're the guy that does all the toolpathing for your shop and if you have files that look like this, and this is a fairly simple file. This is not even that complicated. It's just got a few holes, a few dados, and an outside cut. If you are dealing with much more complicated layering systems where there's tons of layers, this could be really, really helpful. One quick tip that I do want to have you remember, when you set up your strategies for your drill points, it's really important that you use the drill hole centers. So drill centers, not the drill point. The drill point is, and I'll show you why. If I click on drill point, I am required, I cannot click OK until I define an XY coordinate. So I can add in a tool here, and until I give it a depth, it will let me click OK, but it's going to put it at 0, 0. So what this means is that if you try and use drill points, your drill point strategies won't show up inside of ATP. So let's just save this, for example. We'll just call this test, test, test. So it's easy to see. Save it. Hit OK. And I believe that this strategy will not even show up. Nope. So it doesn't even show up in ATP. And the reason why is because if you're doing nesting, or if you've got multiple parts like this, you don't want a drill point that just applies to a specific location. You actually have to have the drill point at the center of an object, which in this case is going to be everything we see on screen here. So let's X out of this. It's going to be everything. It's going to be each one of these individual holes. So that's why I select this. I go to my toolpath menu, click drill centers. This will place the drill hole at the center of an object. So when it sees this layer, when I go to my 5mm drill holes, it says, oh, okay, I've got like a ton of objects here. Now go ahead and apply a drill hole at the center of each one of these objects. So that's just one little quick thing to note. It's a little bit different than a lot of the other toolpaths, so it's just worth knowing. You might get tripped up in that little section. Make sure you use your drill centers for your strategies, and then they'll show up in ATP. Now, one last thing that we want to talk about here is I can save this. So if this, let's just say this is the kind of job that I run every day, day in, day out. I can actually click save. I'm going to hit save as, and I can call this my daily ATP toolpathing. I can type. All right. And I'm just going to, let's actually look at the folder paths for where these get saved. They get saved in the EnRoute 6 folder under a folder called AutoTP. That's the default location for these. You can save them anywhere else. It's not required to, but just know that this is the default location. And it looks like it took the name away from me. So okay, we'll get it here someday. All right, there we go. Now, the good thing is about this that if I hit clear and I close ATP and open it back up, well, let's just clear it. ATP will try and remember the last thing you did, by the way. So for the most part, you shouldn't have to load all of these settings every time. EnRoute will remember that. But let's just say something happens and you end up clearing them, or let's say you need to run a different type of job than you're normally doing, and you did that, and now you need to clear it out. We can clear the layers. I can hit load, click on my little ATP, hit open, and now it's saved all my settings and strategies. So I can save multiple sets of these to use for different types of jobs. This will also, by the way, save your nesting options, and it'll also set up your setup tab options. So anything that you put in here will get saved in this save setting, so you can pull them up really easy without any issues. So that'll save you a ton of time if you have to go between multiple types of jobs. All right, that should be it for now. That's all we had. Is there any questions on using ATP Lite?
Any questions about ATP Lite or about EnRoute?
Or even
EnRoute
or in general? Again, this you can use this in the same way. So if you have EnRoute Pro and you have ATP, you'll have the full version of the ATP. So you can use this in the same way. It's very similar. You'll see a couple slight differences. You're actually going to see one additional tab up here. So just be aware of that. You'll see an additional tab an additional tab show up here that allows you to import DXF files directly. So that's just something that you'll see that's probably a little differently. You actually don't have to import the job manually. In fact, why don't I just go ahead and show you that? Let me just let me show you differences between EnRoute, and that's actually good. I actually have a question from Paul. Let me actually switch over. I actually set my EnRoute up to be. I'm going to save this real quick. And then I'm going to close down EnRoute for the moment. And I'm going to reconfigure it for here. We'll reconfigure it. So I'm using a special license that allows me to switch between versions. And so I'm going to switch it to EnRoute Pro. Okay. And then we'll restart EnRoute. All right. Let's open up our file. And then hit ATP. So the difference here between Pro and Plus is that you'll see this additional setup tab. So this is where, your setup tab will be the same. You're going to see a select files tab. So for example, if you don't use any of these particular cabinet softwares, you can just choose no active application. And what you'll do is you'll click on the select files, for example, and we're just going to add a bunch of DXF files. So we're going to hit add, and I have ATP, and then I can just select all of these DXF files at the same time, and I can import them in. So this gives me the ability to import them in all at once. Now, essentially, the only thing that's different here is that I can actually have this file shut down. I don't have to have any documents open. I can just go into ATP and add all these DXF files in. So basically, between the Pro and the Plus, the difference between the full ATP and the ATP Lite is that ATP Lite, you just have to import the DXF files into a blank drawing, and EnRoute Pro ATP allows you to import them from the ATP window instead. You have the same settings. If I say, in this case, I'm going to say use files because we're using a slightly different method. It's going to pull in all the layers that these files have. So in every single DXF, they have the same similar naming convention. And I would just add in my strategies, hit nest, and nest away. So those are your big differences between, and then of course the ability to use one of these cabinet software. So that's there as well. So you do have these options in Pro if you need to as well. So those are your kind of big differences between Lite and the Pro. So if you're more interested in doing this kind of more on a regular basis, it might be worth getting the Pro just so that you can load in lots of files. If you're only doing a few files, that is probably not worth it necessarily. But if you're doing large batches of files like this would become very tedious if you had to import 10, 15, or 20 files into your workspace every time. So just be aware that that might be a little bit of a thing. But if you're only importing a couple and then you're toolpathing them, then the ATP Lite will do wonders for that workflow. To get this screen right here, I simply click on this little button right here at the top, or you can go to your file menu and it's under automatic toolpath. You're going to see that under the Plus version 2. I'm just used to clicking on that button because I know what it looks like, but yeah, it's under the file menu too. So or this little shortcut right here. No worries, no worries.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Aaron. All right. Are there any other questions today? I think you covered everything pretty well.
Again, this is kind of a quick topic, but it's one of those tools that doesn't get used as often as it should. You can do this with just about any file. It doesn't have to be complicated. You could have one or two different little drawings that you need to do this with, and it just applies it to everything. As long as everything's set up in layers, then you're good. So it's a powerful tool that kind of gets underutilized, even for the fact that you can just use it to toolpath things. So you can just have all your strategies ready and toolpath something really quickly instead of having to toolpath them individually.
All right. We'll go ahead and wrap up for today. Oh, looks like we have one more question from Armando. It said, once you have a file nested, how do you output to a specific machine?
Okay, so that's a good question. So basically, it outputs to the current driver that you have selected inside your software. So if you go to the setup menu and go to machine setup, this is the current driver that you have at the moment. So you can store multiple different drivers within inside here that I can hot switch to. So let's say I have a multicam and a mock CNC machine. I can quickly switch between them, and it saves the, for example, it saves the drill bank and the tool changer setting. It keeps them separate. So if you have tools that go in your mock, but they don't go in your multicam, the tool changer settings all are stored. So you can see I have 29 tools and the box is checked here. If I go to my multicam, I have a different set of tools. So everything is saved separately. These are not general settings. And all I have to do is click on active drivers, and here's my list of drivers. So you've got your pick of machines, and this is what it does. So whatever machine is set as the current driver, it uses that as your output.
Okay. Then said, once you have, okay, I think that's all of them. So our next webinar will be on June 23rd. So next month, we'll be talking about the basics of 3D. And we will send out everyone an email invite to that. And once again, we'll be posting the recording of today's webinar on our YouTube channel, and we'll send you out a link so that you can view that anytime you like. And just want to say thank you for attending today's webinar, and we'll see you folks next month.